Hi everybody, Eric McCool here of Permagora.com. I'm here today with Curtis Humphrey, and we're going to talk about off-grid homesteading. Curtis has been practicing homesteading and living off-grid for many years now out here in this beautiful land outside of the Ashland area. And I'm going to talk with him a little bit today about what all that involves and some of his experiences. So, Curtis, I want to get right into it. What inspired you to get into homesteading to begin with?
Well, the opportunity, I guess. I had been in the situation of my family had acquired some land, and I inquired into whether or not I could start living on the land, which my aunt had been living on for 20 years or so. What I was doing in my life, I was in a state of in-betweenness in my life, where I was transitioning from attempting to be what I had perceived to be a beneficial member of society, working 2 jobs and having an apartment in town, and just living like anyone else. And I thought I was kind of a depressed person. It wasn't working for me. That way of life wasn't working for me. And so I stumbled upon the opportunity of being able to live on some land and started exploring it. So in my case, it was pretty easy to plug in because there was already a yurt available for me to live in. Although I did start off-grid, there was no electricity or anything like that. There was land available for me to be on and a yurt available for me to live in. So it was pretty easy for me to explore that lifestyle. Yeah. And that's pretty much how I started. But then as time went on, as years went on, experimenting with the different ways of living off the grid became really enjoyable and addicting. It became like once you learn about, say, solar panels, for instance, and how to set up a simple system to harvest and store some energy in some batteries, and then use that energy for something really practical like lighting, then you start exploring what's the next thing I can do to make life better off the grid. What's the next thing? And then fuel just starts generating of its and passion, and it just became really interesting and empowering feeling for me to just learn that through like necessity, basically. Like, if I do not put this system into place, I'm not going to have light. Yeah. Or I'm not going to have, in my circumstance, I was a musician, so it was like music was a big priority. So I had to run the computer. So it was like, well, without electricity, I can't run my computer, and I want to be out here off the grid and be able to express myself musically. So I would have to say maybe figuring out electricity was the first thing, and then figuring out all the other different things you can do off the grid that are equally empowering and increase your quality of life, that came later.
That's interesting. That was going to be my next question, was some of the main elements of off-grid living. So electricity is one of them. What are some other things that are real essential if you're thinking about doing off-grid stuff that you have to kind of wrap your mind around?
Water.
Water. Yeah.
Water is a huge one. You're gonna, if you don't have access to what I was fortunate to be in a situation where we had a well available, and that's really helpful to have. If you just think about all the practical things that water accomplishes, showering yourself, the dishes, drinking, everything that water can do, that's, if you don't have it, life can become really hard really quick. You can import water, using a vehicle, carrying a tank in the back, and you can haul in your own water to drink, but without being able to wash your dishes or shower or something like that, the quality of life is really decreases quickly. So figuring out like plumbing was my next thing, my next sort of passion. It started with photovoltaics, and then it went on to solar hot water systems, and figuring out, because the next thing was needing a shower.
Right.
So learning about how to create like a thermosiphoning hot water system, for example, was the next thing I dove into. So I could, using the sun, create a lot of hot water.
Yeah. How did you learn to do all that stuff? Did you just kind of figure it out by trying it, or get books?
Yeah, I mean, on the internet, of course, is the super valuable resource, and it continues to be exponentially every day.
Yeah.
Back in 2008, and 2006, 2007, 2008-ish, that time frame, when I was learning all this stuff, the internet and YouTube was not yet this well-known resource that was so easy to draw upon. So I'm trying to think how. It was a little harder back then. I think what I did was I was finding experts in the area, and I was just chatting with them about what to do, and trying to figure it all out. But it was really time-consuming, actually, because there wasn't really infrastructure in place to get you going. If you're living off the grid and stuff, like the closest you could get would be like RV stores.
Right.
They would say, like, oh yeah, we've got this this unit here or whatever, but there isn't like an off-the-grid superstore or like some easy way to plug in immediate resources, like people that are doing that.
That's a good business idea for somebody, though. as this kind of thing becomes more popular, because I think it is becoming more popular. I feel like part of the reason we're even doing this interview is because there's a whole lot of people out there that are interested in this, and unlike you, who seem to kind of luck into this, there's people who are stuck in the cities who want out, who want to get out into nature, and who want to be off-grid and less dependent on the system, but don't really know how. And so things like where to get your stuff, where to get the knowledge are real important. That's another question I have, is some challenges for people that are interested in this. Let's talk about some of the challenges you've faced and some things that people need to understand before they sell their house and move off grid. That's a pretty big issue.
Yeah, the challenges. Man, where do I start with that one? Well, I think most people are, I guess the biggest shock to my system when I started was the financial realities involved in getting these systems in place. Most people who are promoting off-grid living or tiny house living or something like that are doing so in a way that says you gotta figure things out ahead of time. Financially, have some sort of a plan before you just jump into this way of life. And I'm not going to say it can't be done. I don't want to discourage any dreams out there, but when someone comes across a piece of land or something for cheap, $5,000 or something, and then expects to drive an RV out there and just start building and living from that spot, I just think that that the cost involved in getting some basic infrastructure set up is going to be quite large in the beginning. So I would say come up with some kind of a plan for that. But I can't say that that's entirely true, because I know that my aunt, when she started, she didn't have much money at all, and you can just do without. Yeah. But that's not my style. My style is never to do without, although I did do without, but it can be just really difficult, and I just discourage this sort of like you can get stuck in a poverty place. Yeah. You can get into a place where if it's not easy to take a shower, if it's not easy to do your dishes, if it's not easy to do these basic living things, your whole life can just be trying to live in a very basic way. Right. And then you're not going to be able to like build on what you have to the next level. So I think that it's important to have some basic infrastructure in place in the beginning.
And some financing, or some way to pay for some of the stuff, because I mean, it's not completely free. Even if you have land that's free to live on, there's stuff you have to buy to do this.
Yeah, and I guess creating a buffer for the learning curve experience that you're going to be having, creating a buffer knowing that you're going to have to figure this stuff out on the fly and whatnot. And so yeah, I would definitely encourage some planning ahead of time and some basic infrastructure. Just figuring out like, okay, what's going to be my kitchen shower situation, or you know, what's going to be my electricity situation. If we're talking about off-grid here, I would highly recommend figuring out how to have your photovoltaic system easy to set up and start going, so that you're not you know, without the basic necessities.
Yeah.
And a real, you know, if it's too cost prohibitive to start with the photovoltaics, then the small Honda generators. I mean, that's another thing I would encourage, is don't start trying to adhere to any value system that excludes sort of like an easy way to do. Like, don't say, oh, I can't. Well, I mean, you can do whatever you want.
Don't be a purist.
But yeah, I'm just saying, like,
if you're
saying like, I don't want to use oil. I got to be off gasoline. I've got to.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Well, you're speaking to. It sounds like you're speaking to a little bit of a naivety that might be out there. There's a tendency, I think, to glamorize this whole thing, because it is cool. And it is amazing what can be done, but I feel like it's easy to think that it's going to be a little easier than it's going to be. And you get out here and you might realize that you actually want some of those comforts. And so I guess I look at what you're saying as a caveat to people who might be interested in this kind of thing. It's important to be prepared for what you're going to face if you try and move out into the wild.
Right, yeah. If it's the middle of the winter and your system fails, or like whatever you have in place, you're going to want heat, you're going to want light, you're going to want some basic comforts so that you're not miserable, basically. So, you know, if that means you've got a Honda generator, you know, they're like $900 new. So you've got like this thing that, as long as you can manage to drive to a place where they sell gasoline and fill up a container full of gas, it's really easy to operate. You just put gas in it and you pull the thing and it starts, and you can plug a plug in and you've got, you know, electricity, which is really helpful if you want to have any kind of appliance like a blender or something like that, or if you want to have lights and computers and these sorts of things. And that's the thing, is like, I don't think it's about going backward into this. The transition times right now is about taking the resources we have available and learning to use them effectively, so that we can transition to something else, not just throwing it all away and rejecting it all.
Yeah, appropriate technology. And I feel like to some degree, those of us who are kind of purists in our thinking, like we want to go all the way back to nature, I feel like we have to be patient with ourselves, and we have to give ourselves time to develop that sort of life skill. Because I did a little time in the off-grid situation down in Costa Rica, and I feel like, yeah, we didn't have to pay a water company for our water, but I had to go out and hike the water line every other day practically, and sometimes the water just shuts off and you're like, oh crap, I gotta go fix this now. And sometimes it's hours before you can get a shower or wash your dishes and stuff, and that kind of thing is hard.
Super good point there. To be able to to be able to understand that if you're going to claim independence from the utility companies that are providing this stuff for you, you're going to become the utility company. You're going to become the garbage man. You're going to become the water company. You're going to become all of that stuff. You're going to become the handyman. You're going to be the electrician, the carpenter, the plumber, the person responsible for making sure that these systems work. And it's a good thing. I think for me, it was the most empowering thing in my life, to learn everything about how everything worked. Because without being put in that system, without being put in that situation where you are the one responsible for anything happening at all or working the way you want it to, you take it for granted. It's really easy to just never understand what's happening when you're just turning the light switch on or plugging something in the wall or getting a drink of water or whatever. It's like, it's a good thing, I think. I think that's one of the best things that can happen to someone that tries to live off the grid. Even if they decide it's not for them and they have to go back into a town somewhere or something, just that experience of understanding the reality of that self-reliance and then gaining that skill set from there, I think is probably the most valuable thing about it.
I agree, and I feel like I focus a lot on agorism, and I focus a lot on making the powers that be irrelevant. And part of the way we do that is we empower ourselves to do the things that they do for us. And it's a lot more work, but you are your own boss in that sense. And I think it's worth it, but it's something you have to be prepared to take on, because it's not like you can just call someone else and ask them to fix it for you. It's all on you now, and that's really what freedom is. Freedom is self-empowerment. It's taking responsibility for ourselves. And so I think that's real important for people to consider. If you're trying to bust out of the system, if you're trying to get away from all of the controls, then it's real important to understand what it is you actually need in your life and how it's going to be provided, and be prepared to do the work that it takes to get all of that, because it isn't easy. It isn't easy to get food, to get light and electricity, to get water and hot water. All of these things take both ingenuity and they take embedded energy. You have to buy things like pipes and having to buy things like solar panels and things like that. So that's really cool. I had another question. I want to ask about some of the elements that you have in play out here. We've talked a lot about some of the things you do here. I know you have gardens here and you're growing food and there's orchards. So what would you say are, I know you're not going to be able to name them all, but what are some of the elements that you have, like your worm culture and things like that? Can you run through a few of them so people can get an idea of what it is you do out here?
Sure. Although by no means am I where I really want to be in terms of self-reliance and self-sufficiency. I do have a few systems in place which are a good start in the right direction. So like I said, we have, we're totally off-grid, and we have functioning solar setups that provide the electricity that we need for lighting and appliances and that sort of thing. We have solar thermal shower systems, so we generate our own hot water showers and our own electricity, and we grow some of our own food. I could get a lot better at gardening, but for me it's a balance of I don't necessarily want to spend my whole life as a gardener, so I haven't gotten to the point. So it takes, I guess any gardener out there has to do multiple years before they start getting good at it and figuring out how to time with the seasons and how to grow the food in a way that keeps on producing edible substances throughout the year. In our case, we go through spurts of planting, and we'll have an overabundance of a certain thing, and then so we'll have a lot of kale or some kind of leafy green or cabbage or something like that, and so we're growing some of our own food. And how
about the water system? Is it? I know you have a well, but for irrigation, what's the source of that?
Well, there's a creek, a seasonal creek here on the property, and we have water rights to the creek, and it's a pretty simple gravity feed system.
Gravity feed, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's another sort of luck out, in terms of having land that's capable of doing that. It's not every piece of land is going to have a seasonal creek that you can do that on, and there might be rules and regulations regarding how you can do that.
Well, there may be. I certainly don't advocate people out there take those things too seriously, unless you're going to be threatened by people with violence. Feel like, we all have to do what we have to do to survive. All right, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and let's talk. Let me just tell everybody, we're gonna spend a little more time here, and we're gonna go around and look at some of the things going on the land. There's a really neat vision that Curtis and his wife have for this place, and a lot of potential here. And we can also take a look at some of the systems that are out here. For instance, you have things like rabbits for generating poop, and you have worms that generate worm castings, and really cool off-grid system stuff that anyone can build and do, and that have a lot of value in a situation like this. So we'll talk more about that over time. So thank you for sharing everything, and we'll continue the conversation.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Thanks.